From the medieval period onward, St. Patrick was a figure of national importance to the Gaels of Ireland, in many ways second only to Christ. He was seen as the bringer of Christianity, but as the long-deceased saint, his scope of influence extended deeper into the political and was used to legitimize laws, customs, and kings. He became associated with many things that were not of Christian origin, and many of his stories are derived from earlier pre-Christian myth. Let's explore some of those tales to better understand them and the saint who adopted them. Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon page to help support the channel. Big thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. Unlike some other early saints in Gaelic tradition, St. Patrick was a real figure and is one of the oldest direct sources from Ireland that exists. He most likely lived and preached in the 5th century, but it's possible that it was as early as the 4th. But we are not so much concerned here with the details of the real Patrick, but with the myths that surround him. St. Patrick did not convert Ireland to Christianity in a day, nor in his lifetime. He admits this plainly in his Confessions, where he says that up until this time of writing, that the Gaels persist in worshipping idols and do not know God, but that some are converting. He also admits one of the methods of conversion. From time to time, I give rewards to the kings, as well as making payments to their sons who travel with me. In other words, they paid off local chieftains to allow them to conduct missionary work, then hired armed escorts so the locals wouldn't kill them. We will deal with the details of this another time, but suffice to say, the tales of Patrick's storming of Ireland, knocking down idols of Crom, all of this is a myth established by medieval Christians, but they were not perhaps wholly original. The saint was said to have been born upon a flagstone, something said of various other important mythical or semi-mythical Irish figures. This stone was then imbued with magical powers, such that if one made a true statement or oath while touching it, nothing happened, but if one lied, the stone would weep. When he was brought to be baptized, he was brought to a blind man who had no water to perform the act. A well sprung forth which healed the man's eyes and gave him knowledge of reading as well. Healing springs that cured eye ailments appear to have been common in Romano Britain and Gaul, and it was likely no different in Ireland. The king Echith mac Lugh, a direct descendant of the god Lugh, was said to be one-eyed. When he was forced to give up his final eye, an unnamed figure leads him to a bush of reeds and tells him to pull them out. When he does this, a lake bursts forth, Loch Dergderch, healing his eyes. Still a child, Patrick halts a flood by dipping his hands in the water and drawing fire from it. He likewise breathes upon ice and sets it aflame like wood. The idea of drawing fire from the water is a motif at least as old as the Rig Veda, but it is something we will see continually surrounding Patrick and many other saints. An act ascribed to Patrick most famously, which he almost certainly didn't do based on his own accounts, was to light a fire on Easter in contravention of a sacred tradition of Tara. Now the tale says it was at Easter, but the kings of Tara knew no importance of Easter. It's very likely that Easter is being used here to mean Beltane, which fell near enough to each other to be associated. When confronted by an angry group of druids, it is said that, swifter than speech at Patrick's word, demons raised the druid Lochru into the air, and they let him go down against the earth, and his head struck against a stone, and dust and ashes were made of him in the presence of all, and trembling and intolerable dread seized the hosts that were there. Lorica was enraged with Patrick and went to kill him, and Patrick, singing forth with a loud voice, began this verse from the Psalms: "Let God arise, and let his enemies be scattered, and let them who hate his face be put into confusion. Then the Lord, the protector of his chosen ones in the time of need, saved from this multitude his faithful servant. For with a terrible earthquake and with thundering, and the stroke of the thunderbolt, some he smote to the ground, and some he put to flight. Thus, as was said by the prophet, the Lord shot forth his arrows, and he scattered them. He poured forth his lightnings, and he overturned them. For he sent among them, according to the prophecy of Isaiah, the spirit of giddiness, and he set the idolaters against idolaters, like the Egyptians against the Egyptians. Each man rushed on his fellows, and brother fought against brother, and the chariots and their riders were cast to the ground and overturned, and 49 men were slain, and hardly did the rest escape." So this is not exactly a peaceful conversion as described, and that a priest would order demons to kill a man is certainly miles away from modern Christianity. However, it shows the ideas, largely pagan ones, that persisted into medieval Christianity associated with saints like Patrick. He can command spirits, he calls forth winds, lightnings, and earthquakes, and drives armies into insanity. In a further contest with druids, he melts the snow and darkness caused by them. When Lorica's son Lugh became king, he refused to accept Christianity and mocked Patrick, for which he was swiftly killed by a lightning bolt. One festival that Patrick officially gave his blessing to was Lunasa. He was said to have visited the fair at Taltu and given it his blessing. He forbid any killing upon the field of Taltu, which is recorded as part of its custom in other sources, but he gives his permission for one person to be killed at Rath Erthir, an ancient fortress part of the Taltu site, which would become a major center for the Church of Patrick. Is Patrick condoning human sacrifice? It certainly seems that way. But what was this killing about? It is possible that it was related to a Lunasa drama, a reenactment of the slaying of some evil force, expressed in other ways at many other sites across Ireland around the same time. Another such site is Cruchan Aigle, known today as Croagh Patrick. The Dinshenachas gives a story involving a figure called Crom, who avenges the murder of Cliara Ketach, a woman identified as the daughter of Scal, and that the site is also named after Baren, meaning a large stone, the wife of Lugh, son of Scal Balv, otherwise known as Lugh Lavada. It may be that the stone of the mountain itself is being referred to as the wife of Lugh, and it's likely that Cliara is the sister or daughter of Lugh, who is sometimes called Scal himself, meaning a giant, hero, or even a ghost. In other words, the site was closely associated with Lugh in ancient times, and likewise with a Lunasa tradition of ascending the mountain. This climb is part of an ancient ritual that reenacts the deeds of the God King, which we will deal with another time. But Patrick explicitly takes over this ritual at Cruchan Aigle and elsewhere, so that even though Patrick's official feast day is March 17th, many of his myths and surviving practices pertain to Lunasa, which he incorporated directly from the pre-Christian god Lugh. Patrick was said to have climbed the mountain and resided upon its peak for 40 days, and it compares this to Moses, saying that Patrick was akin to Moses in many ways. Now in the life of Patrick, the date for this climb was near Easter, and it is said he is confronted by a band of demons in the form of black birds. He fights with them and eventually drives them into the sea where they are drowned, suspiciously akin to Lugh's battle with the Fomorians, also likened to crows who emerge from the sea and who are likewise driven into the sea. Yet the custom around the mountain and Patrick that continues to this day does not ascribe this feat to Easter, but to Lunasa. Perhaps there was an attempt to change the time to a more Christian dating, which did not take. After this, a huge host of angels in the form of white birds visit Patrick upon the mountain, and with them is the angel Victor, who would visit Patrick several times. Patrick blesses all of Ireland from atop the mountain, and orders 7 from his household to stand atop 7 significant mountains, to stand guard over Ireland. Again, though the text wants to convince us that this is in relation to Easter, the custom is practiced to this day in association with Lunasa, and most of the mountains listed are known to have had Lunasa mountain climbing traditions. Another version says that God spoke and said, "To all the holy men of Ireland, past, present, and future, God said, 'Climb, O holy men, to the top of the mountain which towers above, and is higher than all the mountains to the west of the sun, in order to bless the people of Ireland.'" So in this tale, Patrick takes the role of Lugh, casting out the Fomorians from the hilltop and guarding over Ireland. This main feature of Lugh, the fierce striker, is most akin to Norse Thor, who combats the Jotun, the direct Norse equivalent of the Fomorians, or Vedic Indra, who fights the Danava. We have already seen how Patrick is associated with lightning, and is also called by one 7th century Irish monk a god of war. But the association does not end there. Not only does he incorporate Lugh's Fomorian fighting mountain climbing, but even his mortal enemy, Mac Cool. Now this name doesn't likely in origin mean son of the hazel tree, as folk etymology in the Lorica tries to ascribe, but its real meaning seems to be son of wickedness, sin, or violation, as can be confirmed by a careful analysis of all the other names associated with this figure, which we're not going to get into here. He was the one to have killed Lugh, according to the Christian accounts. In Patrick's tale, Mac Cool is attacking and killing the congregation of Christians, then plots an attack against Patrick himself. They attempt to trick him by pretending one of them is dead and asking him to be healed. Patrick kills the man, then brings him to life and converts them all. He was further credited with having dispatched a monster from Loch Derg in Donegal, also around the time of Lunasa. Yet perhaps most famously of all, he was the dispatcher of Crom, a name meaning the crooked one of the stack or mountain, and it relates likewise to the name of Cruchan Aigle, where he dispatched the demon crows. Many mountains in Ireland are named after Fomorians or Firbolg, closely related or identical beings associated with the earth and underworld. Crom was said to be sacrificed to in order to secure milk and grain, a practice that began with the first Milesian king, Eravon, and it is said that the firstborn was sacrificed to this god. We can see parallels here perhaps with Balor. The king Tirnmas and his people died in the thousands on the plain due to worshipping this god, and in some sources Tirnmas appears as the grandfather of Lugh, perhaps equating this figure with Balor in some way. Crom is called old or withered, and is associated with Samhain. He had a golden idol in Mugslecht, the plain of prostration, surrounded by 12 other idols. Patrick was said to have destroyed it with a hammer, or in other versions, the statues sink into the earth, and the demon of the statue appears, but Patrick curses it and banishes it to hell. Some have taken the association with the 12 other figures to link Crom to the zodiac. It's also possible that they represented the months of the year. Samhain is the beginning of the new year by the ancient Gaelic reckoning, and it may be that Crom, the old withered bent one, is representative of the god of the old year and the harvest that must be killed off to bring in the new, sharing similarities with Kronos or with the Chinese Nian. In any event, according to Gaelic tradition, Samhain was the battle between the Tuatha and the Fomorians, and the slaying of Balor, and it seems perhaps that it was an after-harvest myth, both looking back to the season past and looking forward to the year ahead. This is mirrored by the Welsh myth of the confrontation with Yusbadin, a tale which begins on New Year's Eve. The first task Yusbadin sets the hero is to plow a field that only the god of agriculture can accomplish. His daughter Olwen is linked to fertility of the earth, causing flowers to spring up wherever she walks. Neither Crom, Balor, or Yusbadin, who by my estimation are likely the same figure under various names, are solar, but they probably do relate to the cycle of the year and the underworld. So the slaying of Crom Cruach by Patrick may well be a representation of the slaying of Balor by Lugh. Now there are some chants or prayers that are said to have been written by Patrick, most famously the Lorica. One section of it reads, "I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock." Now we can compare this to an invocation by Lugh in his battle against Balor, where he says, "Swiftness of wind, howling of dragons, showers of fire, fierceness of lions, shining of sun, radiance of moon." Now these are not direct copies of each other, but they're close enough that we can suspect there was an original to both of them that was pagan in origin, that called upon all the different elements and powers in order to protect one. Given the associations with other myths between these two figures that we've already seen, is it only a coincidence that they are also recorded with similar invocations? Now there are many other myths associated with St. Patrick, and many of them have nothing to do at all with inherited pagan tradition. He was a real man with a real history and accomplishments, but in his mythical role in medieval Ireland, he takes on various functions that were in more ancient times ascribed to gods. Anyhow, I hope you found this interesting, and if you did, you'll give me a like, subscribe, and consider supporting me through Patreon. A big thanks to all of you out there and all my Patreon supporters. And as always, stand tall.